We're following breaking news here on CBS Sports HQ. You can add Kansas to the list of teams now out of their conference tournament due to a positive COVID-19 test. The Jayhawks having a member of the team test positive ahead of their Big 12 Conference Championship semifinal versus Texas, set to take place on Friday night. That, of course, means that Texas will advance to the Big 12 tournament final, where they will face the winner of Baylor-Oklahoma State. That semifinal game coming up later this afternoon. The Big 12 Conference Championship set for Saturday evening at 6 p.m. Eastern time. As you see the bracket, Kansas, the latest team to have to exit their conference tournament due to a positive COVID test. And for more, let's now welcome in CBS Sports senior college basketball writer Matt Norlander. Matt, I mean, this is the second, third time you've been up today as we talk about COVID tests. Basically, just give us the latest here on what's happening with Kansas.
Okay, I have sources telling me that Kansas received a positive test earlier on Friday. The player who tested positive did play in Kansas's win over Oklahoma on Thursday. Because of this and subsequent contact tracing, Kansas is no longer going to play in the Big 12 tournament. As we speak at this hour, the plan is for the Big 12 tournament to continue, just as it is with the ACC tournament to continue, even though Virginia has been knocked out there. Texas would then advance, as you just saw in the graphic. Meanwhile, Baylor and Oklahoma State are still scheduled at this hour as we speak to play. We'll see if the plan changes with that or not. Also certainly notable here that Kansas did leave two of its players behind, including David McCormick, who is one of Kansas's three best players, for precautionary COVID-19 protocol issues. It's not yet known if the current situation with Kansas is positive on Friday is tied to the situation that led to David McCormick and the other Kansas player needing to be left behind while the team played in Kansas City. The big question, of course, like Virginia, which is currently Virginia's status for the NCAA tournament, its eligibility, that's to be determined. They don't know yet. Kansas also do not know yet. As we speak, the university, the Big 12, have not yet released a statement. I'm told that will be coming shortly, but Kansas has done, and this is now the third team in about a 28-hour period. Duke, then Virginia, then Kansas. These are all high-profile teams. Kansas, projected 3 seed, 4 seed level. Virginia, projected 4 seed, 5 seed level. Highly relevant teams now that are out of their league tournaments. And now we wait to see if the selection committee in the NCAA tournament is truly going to be put to the test, and if we will have a field of 68 with 68 teams that aren't the projected 68 teams as we sit here and talk, rolling into Selection Sunday weekend.
Yeah, so Matt, what's the timeline here? I mean, 7 days until the tournament begins, which means that these teams that have positive tests today are cutting it very close. If there's another positive test or a series of positive tests tomorrow, that really puts things in jeopardy and is really going to make things challenging for the selection committee. So in terms of the timeline here, I mean, what happens now with these teams as they head towards Sunday? And as you mentioned, some big teams heading towards the NCAA tournament that could be facing not being there at all.
So the situation is a bit complicated and the details are absolutely essential. And frankly, we don't know all of the details. So we do know this: the player that tested positive for Kansas now will have to go into the typical quarantine and isolate. And let's remember, this is a human being that has contracted the coronavirus. So we send our best wishes and hopefully a very healthy and smooth recovery there. The health officials monitoring in that county where the Big 12 tournament is being played, in addition to Big 12 officials, in addition to Kansas team doctors, they are now all going to contract trace and basically determine, and they have determined, because that's why Kansas isn't playing, all right, how many people were around this player for how long? And now how long do we need to have those people in contact tracing protocols? You have to provide 7 consecutive tests as a person in your tier 1 traveling party to go to the NCAA tournament. So if the rest of Kansas's roster can continue, or most of Kansas's roster can continue to provide negative tests and contact tracing does not wipe out 10 players on the roster, then Kansas should be good to travel to Indianapolis, but we do not have those details as we speak. We await more, both in the form of a statement from the Big 12, a statement from Kansas, and then eventually, let's keep an eye on the group that's in Indianapolis right now, the selection committee, as they are in the process, as we speak, of trying to build a bracket. Seed teams are dealing with this, and they prepared for these curveballs, but it's one thing to prepare for them, and it's another thing to adjust to them and really deal with these situations in real time. And it wouldn't surprise me if we had some sort of comment from the NCAA by the end of the day, given how many high-profile teams we've now seen be affected in their conference tournaments through ineligibility over COVID positives.
When do you think the NCAA would have to pull the trigger on the contingency plans? They obviously, as you mentioned, have made plans. We're expecting them to say something, but I mean, we talk about the timelines for the team. What about the NCAA? When do they have to put these into practice?
All right. In the soonest that things need to go into action is Kansas and Virginia. They need to send notice to the NCAA by the end of Saturday night if they have cleared the protocols they need to clear in order to be eligible to play in the NCAA tournament. Because what the NCAA does not want to do is release a bracket and have like, well, we don't know if Kansas is going to be in or if Kansas isn't going to be in, but we're going to put them in now and then we'll update you later. They need a yes or no as close as they can get to by the end of Saturday night. Then when you look at these other contingency plans, if Kansas is cleared and it meets the thresholds it has to be eligible. If Virginia is cleared and meets the thresholds it has to, then yes, they will be eligible. Those teams are good enough. They're obviously going to be the NCAA tournament field. They will be in the bracket on Sunday if they have passed those thresholds by Saturday evening, end of night, in the 11 p.m. hour. If not, they will be taken out of consideration. They will be taken off the board. And then the committee will continue to seed and select the field and just use an additional couple of teams further down, like teams that would be theoretically teams 69 and team 70 on the overall list. Those teams will then bump up and go into the first four if both Kansas and Virginia were not eligible. So keep that in mind. And if we do have replacement teams that become an issue, that become a thing, that has to be determined between selection show, 6 o'clock on Sunday, and the 6 o'clock hour on Tuesday. That's the only window where a team that's not in the initial bracket can then join the bracket, the field of 68, and that will only happen if we get a bracket on Selection Sunday, we have 68 teams, and from the release of the bracket to Tuesday night in the 6 o'clock hour, one team, two teams, if they can't play, they remove, that's when they bump up. In the 6 o'clock hour on Tuesday night, the bracket locks. No one can join. Teams could still fall out because of COVID issues, but there will be no new teams that can be out of the field after Tuesday night.
So, Matt, what about the teams that were playing against the Virginia, that were playing against Kansas? We're talking about Oklahoma and Syracuse. In terms of contact tracing, when it's a coach, it's one thing, but when you have a player that's on the court, it's something else. What about the contact tracing for those teams that are projected to go into the tournament?
Right, so clearly those teams need to be notified, and they have been notified about the fact that their opponent has a COVID positive issue. Now, there has not yet been any proof of transmission of the coronavirus during college basketball game competition. There's been no clear-cut evidence that that's actually happened. So since the players, it's 5 at a time, they're constantly moving around the court, you're not next to, like, Kansas's player, again, a source tells me that Kansas's player played in the game against Oklahoma on Thursday night. But that player, however often or not he was on the floor, constantly in motion, different people guarding him up and down the floor. You're not lingering next to someone for a cumulative 15 minutes to make that necessary to trigger contact tracing. So while there will be concern with the likes of Syracuse, which is a bubble team supreme, and Oklahoma, which is safely in the field, they will continue to monitor and really, cross their fingers and hope they're well. We just have not seen situations earlier this year at all where a team played another team that had a COVID positive, and then suddenly that team had an outbreak. The opponent had an outbreak. So reason for nervousness, but there's no precedent to say that Oklahoma or Syracuse are in severe jeopardy of not being eligible to play in the NCAA tournament just because they played those teams.
And let's hope it stays that way. CBS Sports senior college basketball writer Matt Norlander, also co-host of the Eye on College Basketball podcast, joining us to talk about Kansas having to exit their conference tournament. Great stuff, Matt. Thank you very much. As mentioned, Kansas having to exit the Big 12 tournament due to a positive COVID test. They were slated to take on Texas in the Big 12 tournament semifinal later this afternoon. That game has been canceled. Texas advances to the final. They will play the winner of Oklahoma State versus Baylor. That game coming up tonight at 6:30 p.m. Eastern time. The Big 12 tournament championship final set for Saturday afternoon. We will have more here on CBS Sports HQ after the break.
Want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis. No yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.